So I have often lit the candles on Friday nights and said the prayers and welcomed the Shabbat as the Shekhinah, as the indwelling feminine presence of the holy. And then I'd wake up Saturday morning and get about my regular business of bending the world to my will. And a few years ago, a couple of decades ago now, I was interviewing a Jewish artist on Shabbat for an article I was writing about his artwork. And I went to his studio, and it happened to be Saturday, and it was wintertime in Taos, cold. Remind me to show you a picture of my Labradoodle Ruby in the snow a couple of days ago. And never mind, don't ask me that. And so I was interviewing this guy, Jonathan Sobel, and when I walked into his studio, he was in his wool socks and his warm fuzzy sweater, and he was sitting in this comfortable armchair, and I walked in and he said, Shabbat Shalom. I was like, oh yeah, it's Saturday, I lit the candles last night, but I didn't remember that Shabbat actually is now really kicking into gear. And there was something about him that was so present and relaxed. And I asked him, about his Sabbath practice, and he said, yeah, I don't want you to write anything down. We'll have this conversation, but don't take any notes. Just take it in. Just see if you can absorb our conversation and not be busy writing it all down. And he invited me into this Sabbath space in such a way that I was able to be with him and take in what he was saying much more deeply than I would have if I had been scribbling notes or recording it on a device, And I said, I've always meant to do Shabbos, to really observe this practice in my life on a Saturday, but I'm too busy. At the time, I was a single mom working. So this was more than 20 years ago because I've been married for 23. But I had children from my first marriage, and I was single mom with working 2 or maybe 3 jobs at the time. We call it the Taos Shuffle. And it was like, no way. There's no way that I could actually take a day off. Saturday, that's the day that you catch up with all the things that you didn't get done during the week. But so when I said that, I can't possibly do that. And he said, yes, you can. You just do it. It's not such a big deal. Just do it. And that just do it. It's sort of like when you quit smoking. Any former smokers in here, or drinkers? I know there are former drinkers in here because I've heard a few of those stories in the last 24 hours. It's just time. It is time. It is like a hitting bottom sometimes to be able to receive a Sabbath practice as the gift that it is from the Divine Mother. It's like, I can't do this anymore. I cannot carry this shit for another minute. Lay it down. And that was that moment. It's like, yes, you can. And moreover, you must. It's life-saving. It is life-affirming. It is the only way that you can navigate these perilous times. And from then on, I did. And it was like, by making the commitment to keep the Sabbath holy, to observe the Sabbath, to lay down my burden at the feet of the Mother, the universe miraculously expanded to contain that intention. And it still works to this day. And I'm busier than ever. There was an element of self-importance, I realized, in I can't possibly afford a Sabbath. You're just a privileged artist, but I'm, a real person trying to raise children and do all these things. But no, the universe is so merciful. And she said yes to my Sabbath practice. So yeah, one of the things that I do is I try to disengage from my electronic devices. Anybody in here addicted to email and messaging and all of that? Just me? I could tell from that piece I read from Wild Mercy at the beginning, you totally get this. You know, the list that's written in fluorescent ink. You have one of those, I know. And so I do try to disengage from my devices because that happens to be one of my compulsions. And Shabbat for me is about releasing the things that compel me the rest of the week. But as Rami said last night, it's not about do this and don't do that. It's about, I don't remember what he said, but for me, it's about resting and receiving the merciful, spacious, unconditional, loving presence of the Shekhinah. You may have noticed that in the meditation this morning, I invited you to take rest in the arms of the stillness, rather than sit straight and watch your thoughts. There is a way in which the patriarchy, who has helped itself to everything, all the world's resources and people's lives, has used meditation, contemplative practice in the world's religious traditions as a bludgeon to beat us into submission. And we use that weapon on ourselves in our contemplative practices. Like, stop thinking. Go back to the sacred word and phrase. It's, most contemporary contemplative practices in the Buddhist traditions of the mindfulness movement, which comes from the Theravadan Buddhist tradition, or in centering prayer in the Christian tradition, and other forms of meditative practice. They often are nicer about it than they used to be. For instance, they'll say things like, when you find your mind wandering, gently return your attention to the breath. It's a blunt instrument, but it's still a bludgeon. One of the ways that I'm reclaiming feminine wisdom across the spiritual spectrum is in the realm of contemplative practice and with the Sabbath practice. So rather than an injunction commanded from on high, how about if we see these ancient perennial wisdom teachings as invitations to rest, to take refuge, to renew and refill the cup of the heart, because we need the heart to be filled with all that goodness so that we can offer it as a drink for this thirsty world. We have work to do. As in that prayer I read, she who hears the cries of the world. It's another name for Kuan Yin. So Father Bill McNichols, who wrote this icon, She Who Hears the Cries of the World, painted an image of Mother Mary, just with unconditional love. And it's also Kuan Yin, who has, as Tara does in the Tibetan tradition, Kuan Yin in the Chinese tradition, has some of the depictions of her is that she has ears in 360 degrees, so she can hear the cries of the world everywhere. She has eyes all around, so she can, actually some of the depictions of Tara, the Tibetan Buddhist goddess of mercy and compassion, the Bodhisattva of compassion, has eyes on her hands. She's holding up her hands and she can see everywhere all the suffering, all the pain. But she also has a boundless heart with the capacity to hold it all. So we cultivate that capacity by giving ourselves a loving invitation to lay down our burdens, to refill our depleted being with stillness, with celebration, with good food and good sex, and walk, well, if you happen to be into that sort of thing, walking in nature, even if you live in a city, there's always some kind of green space, pretty much, that you can connect with, even if it's one small tree. These are the things that restore us. All the spiritual traditions have wisdom teachings that, with a simple turn, enable us to approach them through a feminine space of allowing, of drinking in the essence, the quintessence, and resting, revitalizing. Is this speaking to you at all? Yes. It's not self-indulgent. It's vital and necessary, and it's what reminds us that it's not up to us. That masculine paradigm that conditions us to believe that we have to save the world because it's burning and it's all up to us is untrue, counterproductive. We can only be of service together, and we can only respond to the cries of the world by allowing ourselves to find the joy and wonderment in the simplest moments of our lives. You know, yesterday I spoke about the death of my child, and it turns out there's a big bereaved parent club in this room. That's not a coinky-dink. Often people who have been ravaged are the ones who find their way to these oasis spaces of spiritual community where we're invited to fully show up for what is. But one of the artifacts or the results or I don't want to call it a gift because that's almost a monstrous thing to say about the death of a child. But one of the outcomes of this harrowing experience of loss for me was this strange childlike wonderment that seeped into the broken seams of my life in the wake of my daughter's death. Is this resonating with anyone who's experienced some kind of harrowing loss? What's up with that? I don't know. It's like when you have nothing to lose. Suddenly, the first robin of the spring that hops around in the icy garden is the most heartbreakingly beautiful thing you've ever seen. And you didn't ever quite see it that way before. When Rami spoke about driving in each tree, welcoming him, that I happen to know didn't just happen to him. It comes from a broken, open heart. And I know each one of you has experienced the broken, open heart. On Shabbat, on the Sabbath, in whatever way you may choose to cultivate that practice, it enables us to be present to the heartbreaking beauty of this world. And that changes everything. It restores us to wholeness. And many of us mean to do it, but we just can't quite get around to it. So I'm inviting you to remember the Sabbath and keep her holy.